Hi, and welcome to another episode of Lawyers for Immigrants. My name is Yifei He. I am the president of the law office of Yifei He, where we are dedicated to helping immigrants and new Americans. Every episode, I interview attorneys across different practice areas and ask them how they are helping immigrants. You can find this show on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and more. Today, my guest is Beatrice Leong of the law office of Beatrice Leong, who specializes in family law and divorce. And we'll be discussing how her work impacts immigrants and new Americans. So, first of all, welcome, Beatrice, to this show.
Thank you so much for having me, Yifei.
So, for those of you who don't know, Beatrice and I go way back. We actually started in the University of Connecticut. I met her when I was a 1L, a first year student there, and where she was a 2L, a second year student. And it just so happened that we both came from Connecticut to New York, where we're both originally from. And we each right now have our own practice areas. I specialize in immigration, she specializes in family law. So, Beatrice, so excited for you to be on this show. So, please tell us about your practice area, your and how you know how you help immigrants. Tell us about this journey you've been on.
Yeah, so Yifei's right. We go way back to UConn Law School. We had a great time in Connecticut, but ultimately, home is where the heart is, and we both moved back here and are doing our own practices, like Yifei has said. I specialize in divorce and family law, and that consists of helping people do prenups. Right, if you're getting married, I help people end their marriage if they're saying this is not working out anymore. I also help people with custody matters and children. I help people with orders of protection and child neglect, abuse. So pretty much anything in the scope of your married life, anything in your scope of raising children, that I'm your lawyer. So to answer your question, Yifei, how do I help immigrants? Everyone's getting divorced nowadays, right? In during Before the pandemic, the divorce rate was already 50%, right? One in two people
Wow.
will be getting a divorce, right? But after the pandemic, the divorce rate went really, really high. So not
Um,
only citizens, but immigrants and people on visas were going through marital stress, relationship stress from being inside the house together in New York City, during the pandemic. So divorce rate went up so high that the courts are very behind in processing, divorces and everything like that. In terms of immigrants, a lot of times people who are filing for divorce call me and say, my visa in the United States is tied to my husband. I only got a conditional card based on my marriage to him. So therefore I work together with immigration lawyers like yourself to try to figure out what's the best interest of keeping the person in America first, right? And then how do you end the marriage and what do you get out of the marriage? Do you get custody of the children? Are you going to get alimony and child support? All of that's going to be affected, whether you're married or whether you're going to be getting a divorce. So in New York State, I can say they're very good about not caring about immigration status, meaning even if you're undocumented, even if you cross the border illegally, right? It's not going to affect your divorce in that way where you're not going to be allowed to get a divorce. Anyone can get a divorce regardless of status. However, when the only time the divorce is affected is if it will affect your immigration case. So, for an example, if you started your immigration case and your spouse is sponsoring you, but suddenly they don't want to go to the interview with you, then I will have to call a lawyer like Yifei and say, "What do I do now?" He's not cooperating with the process, the interview process. So, Yifei, can you tell, I guess, the listeners of this podcast, what do you do in that situation? Used to be happy, right? And he's gonna, sure, I'll go to the interview with you. Sure, I'm gonna, sign any papers you need to get approved. But then once a bad thing happens and the couple is no longer together, what's the best process to do in terms of trying to retain your status and trying to stay in America?
well, yeah, Beatrice, I think you're right. There's a lot of details involved in divorce, especially if one of the parties to the divorce is an immigrant, and that's a common issue. If say an immigrant spouse wants to divorce a U.S. citizen spouse, what would happen to that immigrant spouse's status if that immigration immigrant spouse's status was previously contingent upon the American citizen spouse's status. For example, if that American citizen was sponsoring that immigrant spouse. So a lot of times what we've seen from our practice is that um, the U.S. citizen wouldn't go to the interview with the immigrant, and then that would cause an end to the immigrant's application for a green card, for example. So that's what we've seen in terms of the the resolution, and ultimately, I don't think that an immigrant getting a divorce with their U.S. citizen spouse would cause any issues with their papers, because I believe with the immigration system as it stands, if you're married to a U.S. citizen but you get a divorce, and you've already gotten your green card and you're just trying to apply for a permanent green card from a conditional green card, you can actually apply for a permanent green card on your own without the consent of the U.S. citizen spouse. So you can independently file your own permanent green card application, but that's only if you're divorced from your U.S. citizen spouse. If you're still married to them, you would need their approval to file for the permanent status. So, I mean, that's one way to resolve it. But have you seen a lot of instances where immigration status plays a big part in people's decisions to get a divorce?
Absolutely. So a lot of people will call and say, I really don't like my spouse. I'm really having a hard time. They're not nice to me, but I'm afraid that if I file a divorce, then I'm going to be tossed out on the street. I'm afraid that I'm going to be deported. I'm afraid that I'm going to be, not approved for my green card. So a lot of people don't want to file a divorce, in a bad situation. So my advice to them is don't be afraid of that, right? Because New York State has protections. It doesn't matter if you are, not a citizen of the United States. You have protections as a spouse. As a spouse of New York, if you don't make as much money as your spouse, you have a right to alimony. If you have children with the U.S. citizen, you are entitled to child support. You're entitled to lawyers' fees. You're entitled to stay in the house, right, until the divorce is over. So whatever threats the citizen may be making toward you, you don't have to listen, right? Because New York State will never force you to leave the house that you live in during the marriage in the middle of the divorce, unless there is violence. If there's violence in the house, then the abuser must leave the house, right? So if you're the one being abused, then the courts will give you an order of protection and your abusive spouse will have to move away. So you will be allowed to remain in the marital home, right? With yourself or with the children. If you don't have children, you're allowed to remain there yourself. So I would tell anybody who's afraid of filing a divorce, and just because, oh, I'm not a citizen, I don't have a green card, I don't have a visa, I don't have anything, and you're afraid, I would say don't be afraid to file a divorce, right? If you really want to leave your spouse, right? Don't let that be a deterrent, because even if you are a non-citizen, the courts will protect you in divorce case.
Right, that's a good point, because not only does the court protect you, the immigration system also protects you if you are an immigrant trying to get a divorce from your spouse. Because say in the instance where, and we've had this, the spouse tries to throw you out of the house. We've had someone who've been thrown out of the house, but they applied for a protection called VAWA, which is Violence Against Women's Act, and that grants you a green card so long as you can prove that the marriage you entered into was a legitimate marriage and that you are actually being abused by your U.S. citizen spouse. So, so Beatrice, is there a lot of cases where people are afraid and getting abused and they're not getting divorced? Is this actually happening?
So I get a lot of phone calls from potential clients, consultations, and once in a while there will be people afraid. However, I represent a lot of people who are in the middle of their immigration process, and I work with their immigration lawyers to file an order of protection for them. So I recently filed an order of protection for a young woman, from an Asian country, and she got an order of protection, and the husband has to stay away, and she's not afraid to file for divorce now because there's an order of protection from the United States, right? She's no longer an abuse victim, right? He used to smash her head into the door, call her names. But now she has an order of protection. It's a full permanent order of protection for over 2 years. He's not gonna come bother her. Right now, she can file the divorce in peace and then get what she needs.
So what about the immigration process? Because you're saying you represent people who are in the immigration system and they haven't gotten their green cards yet. So what do you do to help them get their divorce first and then the immigration papers second, the green cards second?
What I do is I file a divorce, meaning it is before the judge. But as I said, because there's so many cases, the divorce is not going to happen right away. So unless there's a danger of being deported, the judges will not speed up the case. If you have a danger of being removed from the country, then the judge will put you to the top of the line, meaning you're first in line and you'll get your divorce first, right? But if you're not in danger of being deported, it will work like a regular divorce case. And in that case, what I do is I always coordinate with the immigration lawyer. So if you had sent me a client and said, "Listen, my client is applying for a green card. However, she needs a divorce or he needs a divorce," I will be working with you, calling you on a weekly basis or talking with you on a regular basis to figure out who should be doing what first, right? What's more urgent? Is the immigration issue more urgent or is the divorce action more urgent? Sometimes the divorce action is not urgent, right? Because the people are already separated, everybody has their own money, everybody's taking care of themselves, so the divorce action can wait. Sometimes the divorce action is more urgent, right? Sometimes the person may be coming homeless. Sometimes the people have children that need child support. So I always have to talk to the immigration lawyer and figure out priority.
Right. So what's like a good case scenario for a situation where the immigrant can get their papers and at the same time get what they want? Is it sometimes better for them to just delay the divorce so that they can get their papers first? Or what
Yes,
should they do?
I I defer to the decision of the immigration lawyer, right? Because whether unless it's an urgent issue for the divorce, like I said, then I will take action and go first. But ultimately, what good is the divorce when you're kicked out of the country, right? So we always say immigration lawyers have to figure out their immigration status first before the divorce action, right? Because if you are gonna get deported, it doesn't matter if you get divorced because you're gonna be getting a divorce from another country. Who cares anymore at that point? So first, talk to the immigration lawyer. What is the strategy? What is the plan? What do I need to do as a divorce lawyer to help the immigration lawyer? It's not usually the other way around, right? Like I had a client a couple of years ago who was accused of violence against her husband. Okay, so initially she came for me for the divorce, but once she got arrested criminally and she didn't have her papers, I said, "Listen, you need to handle the criminal case first, then your immigration case, right? Because what good are you if you get arrested for a crime, you're convicted, and you're deported for the crime? I can't help you with your divorce anyway. I mean, I can help you, but you're not even going to be in the country anymore. So, whatever the immigration lawyer says, I go ahead and I work with them, and then we figure it out after that.
I see. So in that situation, was the criminal action based off of the spouse, or was it just like an independent criminal action that they faced,
It
that they
was
did?
based off the spouse. The husband accused her of beating him up. The husband accused him of breaking his stuff, right, breaking his belongings, and then she had to turn herself in. So I said, you know what? Don't pay me for the divorce first. Pay a criminal lawyer if you don't have the money. Pay the criminal lawyer to clear your name so that you don't have a record, because I'm sure if you're going to be applying for a green card, it's going to be harder if you're a convicted criminal to apply for a green card. So she took care. I sent her to my friend for a criminal case, and the criminal lawyer took care of it. He cleared her name. She has no more criminal record. Then she went back to us to file the divorce, right? And then she went at the same time with her immigration lawyer to file the immigration papers. So, you know, when I say priority, there are some things more urgent than others. It really depends on everybody's case, and whoever's listening, it depends on the priority of your case. I don't know what your case is, but we look at it with your immigration lawyer and maybe your criminal lawyer and see and balance it out to see who's more important.
I see. I see. Well, that's very good to know because a lot of times immigrants, they're just put in a corner, especially when it's involving someone with more power, for example, a U.S. citizen spouse, and who's making accusations against that person. So one, they don't have their papers and they're depending on that person to get their papers, and two, they're facing the justice system where they're not even familiar with. So I'm glad that you introduced that person to the right resources and got that person the help that they need. So I mean, there's a lot of stories actually in the news about children, about people marrying overseas foreigners and then having children together in the U.S. and then taking the children overseas without the permission of one of the spouses. So, can you talk more about your experiences dealing with these international issues involving these international spouses?
Yeah, so they happen, but they don't happen as often as we see on the news. You know, you hear about the international kidnappings. Actually, recently, the Supreme Court heard a case about an international kidnapping from Italy to New York City, right? So when the Supreme Court makes a decision, then we have a better idea. But in my experience, I've had only one case in my 9 years of being a lawyer about an international case where what happened was the mother was from South America, and she fled with a 2-year-old child to New York State, right? And the father has been looking for his daughter for 13 years. So what ended up happening is he hired the firm to sue the mother that was living in New York, right? He was in South America. He hired a New York lawyer to sue the mother to say, "I want a relationship. It took me 13 years to find you, but I finally found you, hiding out here." So in that case, because a lot of time has passed, the court said, the child only knows the mother and doesn't know the father. I will allow the child to meet with the father by video, and if she wants to go in person, to meet with father, he can come to New York and meet with the child. So that's what ended up happening in that case, right? So a lot of the time is when we talk about international kidnappings, it's very important to keep in mind, if you're a U.S. citizen married to a non-U.S. citizen spouse, you make sure you keep the passports in your house or your family's house, right? You want to make it hard for the other spouse to flee, because what we have in the U.S. is called the Hague Convention, right? And there are certain countries in the world that will work with United States to get the child back. Okay, so for example, England is a Hague country. So if your spouse is British, they take your child, they fly on, they fly from Kennedy Airport and they fly into Heathrow in London. You can immediately notify the London police, and then they will work with you to try to get the child back. However, if it's a country that is not part of the Hague, like China, for example, if you have a Chinese spouse who has passports to fly the children out of the country, out of the United States, then you got to be careful with that, right? Because then once the child goes with the spouse to China or whatever non-Hague country there is, it's going to be very hard to bring them back to the United States, right? You're going to have to spend thousands of dollars to try to look for them, number one, or try to get the local government there to bring the child back. So if you are married to a non-American spouse, my advice to you is keep the passports in your possession. Make sure the children cannot fly without your permission, right? Make sure the children cannot leave without you knowing. Or if you're not aware, if you think you're happy in a happy marriage, you never know, because sometimes spouses lie to you to escape, right? My advice would be, even if you're happy and you're doing, and it seems like there's no issues in your marriage, I would still say, if you have non-American citizen spouses, to take the passports and leave it at, your brother's house, leave it somewhere, or leave it in a safety deposit box that the spouse can't get to. And then if the spouse says, "Hey, I want to go traveling to Dubai, I want to go traveling to China or Turkey, right, non-Hague countries," then you could say, "Oh, I'll go with you guys," right? Or, "Why don't we stay in the U.S.?" That would be a way to be preventative, so that you're not afraid that your um child is gonna disappear from the U.S. I remember one case where one of my personal friends, he was living in California, and his wife was Japanese, and the wife took the child and went back to Japan, and he took many years to fight trying to get the child back. But unfortunately, through the passage of time, the mother automatically became the custodial parent, right? Just through the passage of time and status quo. So if you want to prevent all of that, just be safe and be preventative. Make sure the kids are enrolled in your name. Make sure the kids don't aren't disappearing for large periods of time. But it is a scary and sad situation that it does happen. It happens every day, but luckily I would say it is not a regular occurrence in terms of fleeing with children.
Right. I mean, I would hope not, because why would you enter into a relationship with someone, have a child with someone, only to have that child be taken away and abducted by someone who's not from the U.S.? So it's just, it defies common logic. But just going off of that point, what if, say, for example, someone who's a multinational executive from a wealthy country overseas is married to someone here who's a U.S. citizen, and then they get a divorce, and then that person later on leaves. So what would happen to, for example, the alimony or the spousal support that that person in the U.S. would receive in the event that, say the court granted them alimony, but then now he's gone, or say the court granted them child support, but now he's gone. So who's going to be paying that money? Because with international audiences, it's sort of how can we make sure that they fulfill their obligations to pay these court orders from the U.S. or from New York?
So that's a great question. So if you get an order of support from a United States court, from a New York or a local New York or New York U.S. Court, it depends on what the country they're fleeing to, right? A lot of times people bank in international banks. JP Morgan Chase is international, HSBC is international, and what you can do is you can freeze their accounts from the US. Okay? So let's say a gentleman is ordered to pay 5,000 a month in child support and alimony to his American spouse, but then he goes ahead and flees to Germany. Okay, if Germany is a Hague state, like I said, a Hague Convention state, then you can go ahead and make an application to the judge and say, Judge, he owes me 5,000 a month. He's not paying anymore because he left the country. He abandoned me and the child, but he left to Germany. You can go ahead and try to put a lien on the accounts that he has internationally and freeze it until he shows up and pays the accounts, right? Anybody who has an order of a court can ask the court to put a lien or a freeze on anybody's bank account. Okay? If he pays you every month, you can't freeze his bank account. But if they don't pay you and they don't follow the court order, you can go ahead and try to seek financial punishment, right? And then if he shows up and say, "Oh my gosh, you froze all my accounts, I can't get money out in Germany," then you can say, "Judge, as long as he pays me my support, he pays me my lawyer's fees, then I'm okay with releasing the funds." But if they disappear and you can't find them, or they don't they sort of work on a cash basis, meaning there's no bank account of them, then the American citizen will be out of luck. You're gonna have to either get your own job or you have to apply for child welfare, because if you're, again, with the international spouse or international person that you have a child with, if they want to leave the country and leave you behind, then really there's nothing to do to stop them.
Right. I mean, I've seen instances where with a child support order that's deficient, or with a alimony order that's deficient, they try to come into the country after they've left, and they've been stopped at the border by CBP, Customs and Border Patrol, and then detained, because that's an immigration international crime for them to just neglect their obligations in the U.S. And obviously, you and I were members of the bar. That's the first question they asked us: do you have any outstanding child support obligations before we
Correct.
admitted? So,
Correct. And you don't have to be an international citizen to be arrested. If you don't pay child support, right? And if you have an order of support or order of alimony and you don't pay it, then the judges here in New York, even if you're two American citizens, you can be thrown in jail. This year alone, I've had to ask 3 judges to put people in jail because they don't want to pay their child support. And guess what? The judge gave me an order to get the sheriff over there. The sheriff will knock on your door and say, "Are you going to pay up? If you don't, then I'm putting you in county jail." And magically, whenever the sheriff comes, people start paying their child support. So we have other ways to protect people who are owed money for their children. So don't ever be afraid to chase the person down. Um, Obviously, it gets harder and more expensive when you live in another country or your spouse has left to another country. But there are ways to protect people if they don't follow the law.
Right, right. I mean, you would think it's common sense for you to support your child, your biological child, and this might be like the culture and custom of other countries. For example, in China or in Asia, where even if you don't have that order, that you would still want to pay that to support the spouse, just because it's your parental obligations to be a parent. So I would assume in those situations, even though there is no hate convention, that they would be automatically enforcing of these protective of the child. So and the U.S. actually is very strict on laws, and some countries in the world aren't. So, but they're still able to maintain themselves without a system of laws in place. And so none is more fundamental than the family law system. So, um, but going off of that point, I wanted to ask you, what if you don't have any papers at all in the U.S. and you're completely undocumented? You came here through the border, and you just don't get along with your spouse. Can you still get a divorce?
Yes, you can. Even if you have no social security number, even if you have no documentation, as long as there's proof that you're married to each other, right? Whether it's a video, a picture of a video ceremony of the two of you getting married, whether it's pictures of you guys in a big wedding gown and feasting, or a marriage certificate or a church certificate, right? As long as you can prove you're married, the judge will let you get divorced. You have to be a New York resident for at least 1 year. Okay, if you didn't get married in New York and you come from, let's say you escaped the Canadian border and you snuck into the United States, you don't have any paperwork, right? You can still file a divorce in New York if you're a New York resident for 1 year, right? Um, if you don't have a social security number, you can still file for divorce because again, ultimately, it is in the people's in the people's best interest that if you're not um, uh, wanting to share your marriage with somebody anymore, they're not gonna stop you from filing a divorce just because you're not a citizen, right? You have a right to marriage, and you have a right to end the marriage, especially if there's abuse or any other situation where that is not good. Generally, marriage in New York State is about finances. Okay, so they're not gonna look at, oh, we fell out of love, oh, my wife is cheating on me. What they look at is, what financial relationship do you have, and how are we going to separate that financial relationship? Because when you're married, it's till death do you part, yes, in a way, but it's in good times and bad, meaning once you marry somebody in the state of New York, you're considered one person. Okay, if I married a husband and he doesn't do anything all day, and I have to pay for his food, I have to pay for his rent, I have to pay everything, and he doesn't make a single dollar, I'm going to be expected to continue to support him the way that we were during the marriage. So the judges will look at you and say, okay, what did you do during the marriage? Did you stay at home? Did you work? Did you both work? And then financially figure out what to do in the next step. Because what they don't want is to have people applying for, food stamps. They don't want people applying for welfare. They don't want people applying for um, cash assistance. They want the two spouses to be together and supporting each other, right? So if you are, let's say you were married for 10 years, and for 9 years your spouse didn't work, guess what? Most likely you will be ordered to pay alimony, aka spousal support, because you supported your spouse for 9 years. They didn't work for 9 years. They're not going to be able to just run out and get a job that will be equivalent to the lifestyle that you gave them. So, if you are the non-money spouse, you get a lot of rights in New York State. Doesn't You don't need to be a citizen to get that right.
Right. Well, it's good to know. I mean, a lot of people listening, they're probably curious about their rights, especially those who aren't married to U.S. citizens and who just still want to exercise their basic rights to be happy in the U.S., even though they don't have papers. But I just wanted to ask you, Beatrice, now that we talked for so long about your area of expertise, what got you into family law in the first place?
What got me into family law is very personal. Family law is a very personal area of law. It's not like filing a patent lawsuit where somebody's stealing your patent, right? Family law is has to deal with directly with yourself your children, your marriage, your money. So what inspired me to get into family law was my own divorce. I was married to my childhood sweetheart, and we were together 13 years, and then I found out that he was cheating on me. So at the time I was a new lawyer, a brand new lawyer, just starting out, and I was like, wow, I want my dream was to be a prosecutor. I wanted to catch criminals. I wanted to prosecute criminals, put them in jail for the crimes against the people of New York. But then after my husband cheated on me, I felt that, I didn't have any more passion about criminal law anymore, and I wanted to do family law because I was so hurt, and the lawyers I called didn't sympathize with me. They were just like, "Oh, get over it, cheating," because in New York State, cheating doesn't matter. Those lawyers are correct. In New York State, cheating does not matter unless there is money from the marriage that you're giving to the cheating to the affair partner. But if there's no money exchange from your spouse to an affair partner, the judges only care about what house do you live in, whose money, what money you make, right? What assets you have. So for me, after going through my own very emotionally, devastating and sad divorce, I said, you know what? I want to have some empathy. I'm going to be able to help other people who are going through my situation because I've been through divorce and I've been through heartache, and I can be a better lawyer than the other divorce lawyers because the other divorce lawyers are happily married. They have no idea what it means to go through an emotional divorce. So that's how I became a divorce lawyer.
Right. Yes. Yeah. Congratulations for starting your own firm. I know you've been having a practice for almost a year now, correct?
Exactly. I started
Yeah.
my practice in the middle of the pandemic, like I said, because the pandemic increased the divorce rate. I am very blessed that I have very good clients. I have, um, I represent decent human beings who just want to do what's right by them and their children, and they just want to move on and get a better life away from their bad spouse. So I'm very blessed to do that for a year. Have my own firm for a year now, and luckily, work is very steady and constantly busy.
Right. Right. I mean, I can attest to that. So, but yeah, I mean, that comes to the end of our program. I'm glad you were able to join us. And the last question I have for you is, which other areas of law do you think that immigrants would benefit from learning about, or that would have synergies with immigration law, from your perspective?
So from my perspective, the besides family law, family and immigration, of course, is very much tied together. Just because there's so many green card marriages, I think majority of my divorce cases are from green card marriages, right? Another field of law that immigrants should probably learn is labor law. Okay, labor and employment law, because a lot of people think they can cheat immigrants out of money. So you're supposed to show up to work. You're supposed to get paid for every hour you work. You're supposed to be paid for your lunch break. You're supposed to be paid for overtime. And a lot of immigrants don't fight their boss because they say, "Oh, if they fire me, then I will be, I won't have money, so I'm not going to fight back about my rights." But if you get a good employment lawyer, right? You get a good labor lawyer, you should be paid every single penny you work for. You should pay for every hour overtime that you worked hard on. Don't let the boss cheat you just because you're an immigrant. A lot of times, immigrant employees are like, "Oh my gosh, if my boss reports me to INS, then I lose everything," right? Don't be afraid of that. Get a good immigration lawyer, get a good labor lawyer, get all the money you're owed, right? Don't be afraid to fight a bad boss.
Right, right. I can personally attest to that because my dad, he was an immigrant to this country, and he himself was afraid of fighting his boss because he would there'll be months when he would not get paid, and these guys would just run off, and he would have no rights. But had he known about his rights, this would not have happened. So I'm glad to have had you on this show, Beatrice, to educate people about family law, about their rights to get a divorce, to get married in the U.S., as well as their rights if they were subject to abuse. So happy to have you here, and that concludes our show. Thanks again to our guest, Beatrice Leong. Thank you for listening. And I'm Yifei He. Make sure you catch us again next time on YouTube, LinkedIn, Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, Spotify, and more. So thank you very much, Yifei He. We put the grant in immigrant.